Let's talk about all the ways in which assumptions show up in our conversations, our relationships, and our fights. Since I've been making assumptions and paying the price for them for years now, I'll share my stories as examples of what not to do and offer some alternative approaches. You should be warned, though, I talk about some tough topics, and some of that might be triggering for you. Because to me, I don't think it's acceptable to not talk about this stuff. Oh, I'm also a little cussy. Please take care of yourself as you listen. Make yourself comfortable, grab a snack and a drink, and let's get started. Welcome back to Confessions of a Chronic Assumer. I'm your host, Ellen Patnode, and I am, in fact, a chronic assumer. So today we're going to talk about how assumptions affect how we show up in all kinds of different situations, like when we make an entrance, and then also how we read the room and gauge our audience once we get there. So have you ever walked into a new group of people and had the conversation completely stop? What sort of assumptions go through your mind when that happens? Have you ever started a presentation or just simply sharing your perspective in a meeting only to realize that everybody's just kind of staring at you blankly? What sort of assumptions are happening there, both in your head and in the room? Or maybe this is something that you never even really bother to think about, which that's okay. Part of this work is figuring out how to increase your level of self-awareness. The more you can be aware of things that you need to pay attention to, engage, that are happening around you, the better off you're going to be. So last time we talked about confidence and how it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario in terms of figuring out like which one comes first. Are our assumptions informed by our level of confidence, or is our level of confidence informed by the assumptions that we're making? That same conundrum kind of applies here too, as it does in a lot of situations where assumptions are involved. So we're going to talk about what happens when we get into these situations. How do assumptions interfere with what it is that we do next? And then finally, we'll talk again at the end about how we overcome these assumptions and just find ways to engage as productively as possible. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples from my own experience here as a fellow chronic assumer. When I went to live in Nicaragua, I was young. I turned 24 right after I got there, and I was there for a year. So as I was still figuring things out, learning the language on the fly, learning the culture, I absolutely made some assumptions about what happens when you show up at a meeting late. So on this particular morning, I was running late, and I got to the office where we were meeting, and I slipped into the meeting. I was about, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes late, and I just sort of slipped in quietly and sat down because that's how I'd been trained in the US. If you're late to a meeting, you don't disrupt the whole thing. You just find a seat quietly, try to be unobtrusive, and wait for an opportunity to just kind of naturally engage. Well, as soon as I sat down in my seat, every eyeball in the room turned in my direction, and I had an absolute oh shit moment of like, what's going on? What do I do? Oh my God. And so I just sat there quietly staring back at them, turning all sorts of shades of red. And finally, I just said, buenos dias, in like a super tentative voice, just saying hello. And everyone in the room went, buenos dias. And then they went back to what they were meeting about. And I thought, the fuck? I'm just sitting there like so in my head, caught up in the awkwardness of what had just happened, making assumptions about how badly I had screwed up, what they must be thinking about me. I couldn't even hear the rest of what was going on in the meeting because I was so consumed by those assumptions of what they must be thinking about me and how this was going to impact my ability to work successfully in the organization. And I think that happens sometimes. We enter a situation, we're not sure what to do. We realize we've done something that's maybe not exactly the right thing to do or not the perfect thing to do. And then we get so consumed by that error that we made that it shuts down our ability to really recover in the moment and move forward. A few years later, when I was working as a community organizer, one of the things that I built a reputation for in my own organization, but then also at a broader national level in the organization, was my ability to build teams in the different churches that were part of our organization. I was still quite young. I was in my late 20s by this point, but one of the youngest organizers, one of the youngest staff members. And also the leaders, the people who were involved in our organizations were often much older than me, usually in their 50s or 60s. We even had some in their 70s and 80s that were part of this. It was less common to have really young people involved in the work. And I was asked to go to the national training week that we offered and give a training about building teams. I stood up in front of that room and I looked around, and all I could see was how much older and more distinguished everyone in the room was than I was. I suddenly felt very self-conscious about what I was wearing and how my hair was done. And I got way inside of my head, making all sorts of assumptions about how other people were seeing me and what they must be thinking, that I couldn't focus on the subject matter at hand. And I stammered my way through it. I was quiet. I didn't do what I was supposed to do. I was not engaging. I didn't draw anybody out. I just sort of nervously, quietly, half hid behind my long hair and stammered out what I thought I was supposed to say. So we take a break. We go into the break room, and my boss was sitting in the room evaluating me because it was my first time at national training. We got into that staff room, and she ripped me a new one. She handed me my ass on a platter and was like, "What the fuck is wrong with you? What did you do?" I started crying. I was so embarrassed. And I told her, I said, "Everybody in the room is so much older than me. What the hell do I have to tell them? I'm a young person. They're not going to listen to me. They're judging me. They're thinking that I don't know what I'm talking about." She practically crawled across that table at me and she said, "You are the only one in the room who doesn't think you know what you're talking about. They signed up for this session because you have a reputation as somebody who has been able to figure out how to do this effectively. And they came to your session because they want to learn what you know. You are the only one self-doubting right now. So get over it." And she helped me shift my way of thinking about it. My belief and my way of thinking about it in that moment was that I had nothing to offer these people with decades more life experience than me. And what she helped me understand was that that was an assumption, that just because they were distinguished and had age on their side and wisdom about life doesn't mean that they knew how to do what I knew how to do professionally. She was able to help me check my assumptions, and I'm happy to say that I went back in for the second half of that session and I took charge. She told me to fake it till I made it, and I took that to heart. I faked it and I made it. And the rest of that session was a big success because she was able to help me reframe in that moment. Another situation that we show up in very commonly is the end of our day. We show up at home at the end of the day. And if there's other people in your house, they might have a reaction to the energy that you bring in the door with you when you walk in at the end of the day. So if I walk into the house at the end of the day and I've had a shit day and I'm in a foul mood about something, everybody scatters immediately because the energy that I bring in is Mama Bear, whose head's going on the chopping platter next? Who didn't do their chores? Who can I go after and take this out on? Because unfortunately, I have a bit of a reputation in that way, not unearned. So they're making assumptions that I could probably use some space. They're making some assumptions that I'm going to go on the war path, that I'm going to look for somebody to take down. They don't want to fight. They want to avoid a fight. I assume that they know I need to talk about this stuff in order to get it out of my body, off of my chest, so that I can move on from it. But none of the people in my household are wired that way. They're all internal processors. They want time to just sit with it, think about it, fume about it, and then be able to let it go. I am an external processor. I need to get that shit out in order to be able to move on from it. So they're making assumptions that I need a minute, and I'm making assumptions that they know I need to talk about it. So right there's an immediate breakdown. But then the further assumption that gets piled on to that is that I assume they must hate me. They must hate me if they're walking away and leaving me. And so it causes me to isolate myself, and then I get even madder, and shit just goes downhill from there. So that's something else that happens in these situations where we walk in, we make assumptions about what other people expect, what they might be thinking. We make assumptions about our own worthiness in that moment to be in that space or speak up. And then these things start to have a snowball effect because the assumptions run rampant in our heads. So what can we do about this? What an awful place to exist sometimes, right? Please tell me I'm not alone. Here's a few things we can do about it. One thing is we can ask more questions, right? In the meeting situations, in the work situations, that's like almost always a place I'm going to recommend we lean in more. We just say, can I just ask a couple questions to clarify things? And in fact, when I went back into that training session, that's one way that I got it back on the rails is I showed up and I asked some questions. I said, tell me what you are most struggling with when it comes to building teams, so that I could have them give me fodder on which I could build a response. That's something you can do in a meeting of your own. Ask more questions so that you get a better sense of where people are coming from and you can build from there. Another strategy is to just pay more attention. Pay attention to what's happening so that you can adjust your response. By paying attention to the things that are outside of ourselves, we get out of our own heads a little bit. And that can be a really useful strategy when it comes to getting away from the assumptions of what we think everyone must be thinking about us when we walk into a new situation. Just pay attention, look at body language, see if you can pick up some cues from there. Another strategy is to engage in that self-talk before you enter into the situation. Like with my bad day at work, if I have had a bad day, then I can tell myself before I get out of my car, before I walk into the house, I can say, okay, let's take a deep breath. Let's relax. Let's make sure we remember that we live with a bunch of introverts who won't know that I need to talk about this till I say it. And let's remember nothing that happened today is the fault of anyone living in the house. So let's check that energy. And let's make sure we're walking in. Yes, I talk to myself like there's multiple of me. Let's make sure we're walking into the house with the kind of energy that attracts compassion and empathy, and not the kind of energy that sends everybody flying into their own corners. The other thing is, on the back of that, ask for what you need. So if I walk into the house and I've had a shit day, I can say, I need to talk about this. Anybody want to grab the dog and go down the road for a walk with me? Because I really need to just unload and vent. That would help me a lot before I cook dinner. Ask for what you need in any given situation, because otherwise you're assuming people know what you need. And that assumption puts you in a dangerous place, because then we're relying on other people to just figure things out, and that's completely unfair. Another strategy is around intentions. Make sure we're setting clear intentions. So in a meeting situation, even at home, right? Any place, make sure that your intentions are clear. Here's what I need. Here's what I'm hoping to get out of this situation. Here's what I'd like you to help me understand. Whatever it is, clarifying your intentions can go a long way to reducing the amount of assumptions that you're experiencing. And last but not least, I want to hit a little bit on the power of reflection. In order to increase our self-awareness around some of this stuff, we have to be willing afterwards to take a minute and reflect. What happened there? What worked well about that situation that I want to make sure I do again in future situations? What did not go how I thought it would go or did not go as I planned, so that I can make sure I avoid that kind of thing in a future situation? Reflections don't have to be lengthy. You don't need to sequester yourself for a half day. They can be quick, but they're regular check-in opportunities that allow us to make course corrections and adjust so that we keep growing and getting a better result with people around us. Thanks for joining me again today. Come back next week. We're going to be talking about how assumptions affect every type of human gathering that there is, from meetings at work to your kid's baseball game. Until then, connect with me on social media. On LinkedIn, you can find me at Ellen Patnode. Facebook and Instagram, you can find me at Patnode Coaching. And remember what the late, great Albert Einstein said: doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. We've got to be willing to do different to get different. Have a great week.